You know something has to change. You've known it for a while, maybe a long time. Longer than you want to admit, honestly. You feel it when you wake up in the morning, that quiet, heavy feeling. The one that's there before you've even fully opened your eyes. Before the day has done anything to you yet. It's already just there. That low hum of knowing something isn't right. Something needs to be different. You feel it at night too, when you're lying in the dark running through the same thoughts again. The same conversation with yourself that you've had 100 times. You know what you need to do. You've said it clearly to yourself. You've made lists. You've made plans. You've had those moments, those really clear, sharp moments where you could see exactly what needed to happen, and you were completely sure that tomorrow would be the day. And then tomorrow comes, and you're in the same place. The same job you said you'd leave. The same patterns in your relationships that you keep promising yourself you'll break. The same habits that you hate but keep returning to. The same distance between where you are and where you always thought you'd be by now. And here's the part that really gets to me. The part that I think hurts the most about this. It's not that you don't care anymore. It's not that the hope is gone. It's still there. You can still feel it, that pull, that wanting. The dream hasn't died. You haven't become numb to it. You just can't seem to move toward it. It's like there's a wall you can't see. You keep walking toward it and hitting it and not understanding why it's there. You try to push through and something underneath you just says no. Not in a voice, not in a thought you can argue back with. Just this silent, invisible no. Stillness, inertia, the same spot again. And so you start to think things about yourself. You start to wonder if maybe you're just lazy, if there's something in other people, some switch, some drive, some inner engine that fires when yours just sits there quiet. You wonder if you're built for less than you want, if maybe this is just who you are. I want to sit with you in that question today, because I know it. I've lived in it. I've called myself every name you've probably called yourself. And what I've found, after a lot of reading and a lot of sitting with this honestly, is that the story we tell ourselves about why we can't move is almost always wrong. It's not laziness, it's not weakness, and it's not who you are. It's something much older than any of that. Something that started long before you became the person sitting here wondering why you're stuck. And here's the thing, I don't think this is talked about honestly enough. Most of the advice out there treats this as a motivation problem, as if you just haven't found your why yet. As if the right podcast or the right quote or the right moment of inspiration will finally flip the switch and make you go. And you've probably tried that. You've probably had those moments of inspiration, maybe dozens of them, and they felt real. And then they faded. And you were still in the same place, now with the added shame of having believed in them. Now, that's not a you problem, that's the wrong diagnosis. Now, let me try to explain what I think is actually going on. There's an idea I came across that changed the way I think about all of this. I keep coming back to it. It goes like this. The patterns we're stuck in were once solutions. Just sit with that for a second. The patterns we're stuck in were once solutions. Every single behavior you have that frustrates you right now, the avoiding, the putting things off, the starting and then stopping, the going in circles, the promising yourself and then watching yourself not follow through. None of that is random. None of it is just weakness showing up for no reason. It started somewhere as an answer to something. A real something that was happening in your life at some point, probably a very early point, where this pattern made complete sense. At some point, staying still was the safer option. At some point, not trying meant not being rejected. At some point, making yourself small, not wanting too much, not reaching too far, meant you didn't have to feel the specific kind of pain that came from reaching and having it not work out the way you needed. The problem is that those old answers are still running, even when the original danger is long gone. Even when the person or the situation that first taught you this pattern is years behind you. Even when logically you know you're an adult now and things are different. The body doesn't care about logic. The nervous system doesn't update itself just because time has passed. It keeps doing what it learned to do, quietly, reliably, in the background. Like very old software still running on a brand new machine. You try to move forward and the old software says, last time we tried something like this, it hurt. Let's not. And you feel that as stuck, as inertia, as laziness, when actually what it is protection. Old, loyal, outdated protection. Protection that doesn't know it's not needed anymore. Now, let me tell you about someone. I'll call her Nadia. Nadia was smart, genuinely talented, the kind of person that other people looked at and thought, she's going to do something real. She had ideas constantly, real ideas. The kind that feel solid when you're turning them over in your head. And she had a dream she'd been carrying for years, something she wanted to build, something that would finally feel like it belonged to her. She had notebooks full of plans, detailed ones. She knew exactly what the first step was. She could have written it in her sleep. She'd thought about it so many times. But she never took it. Not once. And she could not understand why. Every time she sat down to actually begin, something strange would happen inside her. A kind of heaviness, an urgency to do something else first, something she suddenly remembered needed doing. The kitchen that needed cleaning, the email she'd forgotten about, the thing she wanted to check on her phone that turned into 2 hours she couldn't account for. She'd come back to herself at the end of the afternoon feeling sick with herself, calling herself things I won't repeat here, promising harder, making the plan again, going to bed certain that tomorrow would finally be it. But tomorrow never was it. She started thinking she was broken, that there was some basic thing inside her that worked in other people and just didn't work in her, that maybe she was someone who was meant to want things but never actually have them. Now here's what Nadia didn't know about herself. When she was a child, every time she had gotten excited about something, every time she had let herself believe in something, every time she'd said out loud, I want to try this, I think I can do this, something had happened. Not something dramatic, no one screamed at her. It was quieter than that, which in some ways makes it harder to trace. Her excitement was met with silence, or a look, or a comment, something small that left her feeling foolish for having hoped. Her mother wasn't a cruel person, but she was a frightened one. She had learned somewhere in her own life that wanting things sets you up for disappointment. So without meaning to, without any awareness of what she was teaching, she passed that lesson on. Every time Nadia reached, the temperature in the room dropped a little. And so Nadia learned. Children always learn. They are extraordinary at learning. She learned that starting something meant risking that moment again. That specific exposure, that particular way of feeling stupid for having believed in yourself. She didn't learn it in words, she learned it in her body. In the automatic tightening that came before she reached for something, in the pull backward that happened before she could fully commit to moving forward. And now, sitting at her desk years later, notebook open, plan written out, clear as day, every time she tries to begin, something in her body pumps the brakes. Not her mind. Her mind wants to go. Her mind believes in the plan. Her body says no. Because in her body's memory, beginning something means that moment of exposure, and exposure means pain. This is what people call self-sabotage. I want to say something about that term because I think it gets in the way of actually understanding what's happening. Self-sabotage sounds like you're doing something to yourself deliberately. Like there's some destructive part of you that enjoys watching you fail. Like you're the villain of your own story. It's not what this is. What this actually is protection. Old, loyal, well-meaning, completely outdated protection. Your nervous system is trying to keep you from a pain it still remembers. It doesn't know you're not 8 years old anymore. It doesn't know the cold room is in the past. It doesn't have access to your reasoning. It just knows. Last time we reached, it hurt. So it stops you before you can reach again. That's not sabotage. That's a scar doing what scars do. And I have to stop here and say something. Is that fair? I keep coming back to this. Is it fair that a child learns to fear her own ambition because the people around her were too scared, or too empty, or too distracted to make room for it? Is it fair that we're out here years and years later, stuck calling ourselves failures? Not because we are failures, but because somewhere early on, daring to believe in ourselves didn't feel safe? No, it's not fair. I want to say that plainly, without softening it, without rushing past it to get to the hopeful part. It is not fair. And I think we need to sit with that for a moment before we move on. Because I think a lot of us skip past the unfairness too quickly. We go straight to, okay, but what do I do about it? Without ever letting ourselves actually feel the wrongness of having been taught to stop ourselves. You didn't choose this. You didn't come into the world wired for paralysis. You were born wanting things, the way all children are born wanting things. Reaching, curious, full of noise and need and hope, and something around you, or someone. Well, the whole atmosphere of the house you grew up in taught you to pull that back, taught you that your wanting was inconvenient, or dangerous, or embarrassing, or simply too much for the room, and you adapted. Because that's what children do. They adapt brilliantly, they read the environment they're in, and they adjust. You did exactly that. You learned to protect yourself in the most efficient way you knew how. You just learned it in a way that now costs you, in a way that stands between you and your own life, and that is not your fault. even though it is now your responsibility to work through. Those are two very different things, and I think it matters to hold both of them at once. Now, here's the thing that I find both lighter and heavier at the same time. Now, the thing that made me put down what I was reading and just sit there for a while. Some of what's keeping you stuck might not have even started with you. Think about your parents for a moment. Really think about them. Were they people who chased what they wanted? Were they people who took risks, who went after things, who believed at some basic level that they deserved a life that felt like theirs? Or were they people who also played it small, who also had dreams they never moved on, who also had 100 reasons why now was never quite the right time? Fear travels through families, not only through the things people say to you, not only through the lessons people teach explicitly. It travels through what is modeled, through the emotional air of a home, through watching the people who raised you make themselves smaller year after year and learning without knowing you're learning that this must be how adults live. That this is just what life is, that people like us don't really get to have the things we want. Your grandmother who never left the town she was born in, not because she chose to stay, but because leaving felt unthinkable. Your father who had something he loved and put it in a drawer because someone told him it wasn't practical and he believed them and never stopped believing them. Your mother who wanted something once, you could feel it in her, and who at some point stopped wanting and called it maturity and learned to be a little bitter about it in ways she probably never even noticed. Their unfinished stories didn't stay with them. They passed forward. You carry them. Not because anyone handed them to you deliberately, because you were shaped by people who were shaped by those stories. And you absorb their fears the way you absorb everything in childhood, completely without knowing you're doing it, without any defense. So sometimes when you sit there frozen, trying to make yourself move, what you're actually pushing against isn't just your own history. It's theirs too. It's generations of people who learned that wanting things leads to pain, that reaching leads to falling, that it's safer to stay small and call it wisdom. That's a much heavier thing to push against than laziness, and you deserve to know that's what it is. I want to come back to Nadia because her story doesn't end with her frozen at the desk. Something shifted for her, not dramatically, not all at once. She started asking a different question. Instead of why am I so lazy, she started asking what am I actually scared of right now. And when she sat with that, honestly really sat with it instead of rushing past it, the answer surprised her. It wasn't failure exactly, or not just failure. It was something more specific. It was that feeling, that particular cold feeling of reaching and having the room go quiet. She was terrified every time she tried to start, of recreating that specific moment, of feeling foolish for having hoped. There's a name for the deep pattern underneath this. It's called a schema, or a life trap. A belief that got built so early from so many repeated experiences that it stopped feeling like a belief and started feeling like the truth about reality. Nadia's under everything was something like, when I show what I really want, I will be made to feel small for wanting it. So she kept her wanting hidden, in notebooks and plans, in the privacy of her own head. She kept it safe from the test, because as long as she never fully committed, she never had to face that cold room again. This is called avoidance, and it sounds simple, but it isn't. Because avoidance doesn't feel like fear from the inside, it feels like being sensible. It feels like waiting for the right moment. It feels like not being ready yet. It disguises itself so well that you can spend years in it without ever recognizing it as what it is. What finally helped Nadia, at least a little, was learning to notice the moment just before the avoidance kicked in. That specific feeling in her chest, just before she'd reach for something to distract herself. She started putting a name on it, just naming it, not to fight it, not to push through it, just to see it clearly. Oh, there it is. That's the feeling, the one that says this is dangerous. And something about naming it regularly, consistently, started to change its power over her. Not eliminate it, it didn't go away, but it stopped being invisible. And invisible things have so much more power than things you can see. There's something else I want to talk about, a specific type of stuck that I think a lot of us know from the inside, even if we've never had a name for it. There's a way of living where your real life always feels like it's just about to begin, where you're always in the preparation stage, reading, planning, researching, getting ready, where there's always one more thing to figure out before you can start, one more thing to have in place, one more thing you're waiting to feel. And the years pass in the waiting room. I've been there. I want to be honest about that. I've spent long stretches of my life feeling like the actual version of my life was somewhere just ahead of me. That the real thing would begin when conditions were right, when I was more ready, when things settled a little, when I had more of whatever I thought I was missing. This has a name. It's called provisional living. living as if where you are right now is temporary, as if you're just passing through on your way to the real thing, which is always coming, which is always almost here. And the tragedy of provisional living is that you can do it your entire life. You can spend decades standing just outside the door of what you actually want, always almost walking through it, always finding one more reason to wait just a bit longer. The reason this happens, I think, is that committing fully to something means risking your actual self, not your imagined self, not the fantasy version of you who does everything perfectly and succeeds on the first try. Your real, uncertain, flawed, frightened self, the one who might try and fail, the one who might try and be seen trying and still fail. The one whose failure would say something real about them. That's terrifying. Especially for people who were taught early that their real self wasn't quite welcome. That their real self was too much or not enough or simply not what was needed. And those people, we people, have spent so long keeping the real self slightly hidden that letting it fully show up and fully try at something feels impossibly exposed. So we stay in the preparation, where the dream is safe, where the version of us that could have done it is still possible, still intact. Protected from the test of reality. But a protected dream isn't alive. It's just a very comfortable cage. I want to say something hard now. At some point, understanding why you're stuck has to become a bridge toward moving, not another room to live in. Because there's a version of this, of learning all about your patterns and your schemas and your family history and your nervous system that becomes just a new kind of staying still. A more sophisticated kind. Oh, it's because of my parents. Oh, it's the intergenerational patterns. Oh, my nervous system was wired this way early on. And all of that might be completely true. Every word of it. But understanding without any movement is still standing in the same place. I say this with a lot of gentleness because I've done this myself. I've spent time in the understanding phase and called it healing. And it is part of healing, genuinely. You can't move well from something you don't understand. But at some point, the understanding has to become a door, not a destination. At some point, you have to walk through it, even imperfectly, even scared, even without feeling ready. The insight is the beginning, not the end. And I think a lot of us, myself included, can spend too long in the understanding phase and call it doing the work, when really the work eventually has to involve actually doing something. However small, however imperfect, however terrified. So what does beginning actually look like when you've been frozen for a long time? Not a big leap. Not a dramatic overhaul, something much smaller than that. The thing I've come to believe about action, after thinking about this a lot, is that willpower and motivation are the wrong tools for this particular job. Because if the problem is that your nervous system learned very early that moving forward equals danger, then trying harder doesn't fix it. Trying harder just adds more pressure to a system that is already telling you the pressure is dangerous. It makes things worse usually. What actually works slowly is showing your nervous system something different. Proving to it over and over in very small ways that starting is not the same as being destroyed. This means the step has to be almost embarrassingly small. So small it feels like it doesn't count. Not start the business. Send one message. Not change your life. Write down honestly one thing you actually want. Not finally become who I'm supposed to be. Just do the next tiny thing. And then the next one. And then the next. The point isn't the size of the step. The point is the repetition. Each small step is a message to the part of you that's been keeping you still. A message that says, we tried something and we're still here. We reached and the room didn't go cold. We started and the world didn't end. That part of you won't believe it after one time. It won't believe it after 5 times. But something starts to shift eventually with enough repetitions. Not a dramatic shift, a quiet one, a little loosening. And I heard about someone once who was in this exact place, completely frozen. He'd been carrying something he wanted to do for years, something creative, something that felt deeply personal, and every time he tried to start, the same thing happened. He'd open the blank page and just close it again. He told himself he wasn't inspired. He told himself he'd do it when he had more time, more energy, a better setup. What he finally started doing was something almost ridiculous. He gave himself permission to open the page and write one sentence. One bad sentence. One sentence that he was allowed to delete immediately after writing it if he wanted to. Nothing counted. Nothing was being saved. He was just putting one sentence on a page and then closing it. That was all. He told me he felt stupid doing it, like it wasn't real, like it didn't count as actually doing anything. but he kept doing it. And somewhere around the third or fourth week, the sentence turned into a paragraph. Not because he decided to write more, just because the page stopped feeling like a threat. That's what small steps actually do. They don't build momentum the way people talk about momentum. They reduce threat. They teach the old protective part of you that this particular thing, this particular reaching is survivable. That's the whole point. I want to close with something I think about a lot, something I find both hard and helpful in equal measure. Think about how long you've been carrying this. How many years of calling yourself lazy? How many nights of frustration with yourself? How much energy has gone into fighting yourself, being disgusted with yourself, deciding that the reason nothing changes is something fundamentally wrong with who you are? That's such a long time to be that hard on yourself. For something that was never really about character, the people who seem to move easily through life, who take action, who start things and finish things and don't freeze at the edge of their own potential, they were mostly just fortunate in this specific way. They grew up in environments where starting felt safe, where wanting things out loud was okay, where failing didn't mean something permanent and damning about who you were, where the room stayed warm when they reached. You didn't have that consistently. Maybe sometimes, maybe in glimpses, but not steadily enough to wire your whole system toward feeling safe when you reach, and that is not your fault. I want you to hear that not as something nice to say, but as something that's actually true. The wiring you have came from somewhere real. It made complete sense given where it came from. It kept you safe, when safe was what you needed most. It was brilliant even. Children who develop these patterns are not weak, they are responsive. They are reading their environment clearly and adapting perfectly. You adapted perfectly to an environment that didn't fully support your wholeness. And now the work is to gently, patiently update that adaptation. Not destroy it, not fight it, not shame it away. Update it, show it something new, repeatedly until it starts to believe that something new is possible. That's a long way back. I won't pretend otherwise, but you are here. Still asking the question, still wanting something to be different. Still carrying that hope even after all the times it's let you down. Even after all the times you've let yourself down, or thought you did. The person who keeps showing up to this question is not someone who has given up. That's someone who is still fighting for themselves, even when the fighting looks like just sitting here one more time with this feeling that something has to change, and something does. I believe that. I believe you are not as far from it as you feel tonight. The distance between where you are and where you want to be is full of old fear. Not laziness, not weakness. Old fear, doing its job the way it always has. And old fear when you can finally see it clearly and understand where it came from and stop confusing it for the truth about who you are. Old fear can move, slowly, not in one day. Not without it coming back sometimes and winning again for a while. But it can move. And so can you. Be gentle with yourself today. And the next time you feel frozen at the edge of something, try not to call yourself lazy. Try asking instead, what is this protecting me from? And does it still need to protect me? Just sit with that for a while.